Okay, so our next guest right now is an environmental activist and community organizer in New York State. She's been leading the fight for a frack-free energy policy. She's the chair of Protect Orange County, founder of Principled Progressives, and a 2016 and a 2018 state Senate candidate. She's a friend of the show. She's been here before. It's Pramila Malik. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me again, Jimmy.
So I just real quick now, you've been on the show. You've been fighting the fracking plant that's in Orange County, New York, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you were arrested, and you were using the defense. What was the defense you were using?
It was called the necessity defense. It's part of the New York State Penal Code, in which one can justify violating the law, engaging in criminal conduct in order to prevent a greater harm to the public. And that was the argument that we presented to the court, to the lower court. We had prominent climate experts testifying that, so let me just backtrack for a minute. We were blockading a brand new 650 megawatt frack gas power plant that would increase the state's greenhouse gas emissions by 10% overnight, just like that, and would plug into 100 to 150 fracking wells in our neighboring state of Pennsylvania. So we had prominent climate experts testifying that our actions were necessary in order to prevent an imminent harm, the harm of both public health, which is the other side of the climate change coin, as well as climate change.
So just to give people what you're talking about. So the necessity defense is like, just to break it down for them, it's illegal to push an old lady down. But
right.
If a bus is coming and it's going to hit her, you have to push her down and get her out of the way. And so that's the necessity defense. There's going to be a greater harm coming if I don't do this. And so that's been recognized in the penal code for a while. And so that's what you were using. But the judge said that you can't use that.
You know, it's really interesting. The judge allowed our experts to testify and acknowledged that climate change is a real harm. But, you know, his argument was a little twisted because he said that our actions were not really going to shut down. He said that our actions were premature because we did it when construction had begun, as opposed to when the plant was about to flip the switch on. And so he said that our actions, there was no immediacy to the effect, to the harm that we were trying to stop. And, you know, he also said that the harm was speculative. And again, this flies in the face of our expert testimony. We had, you know, Robert Howard from Cornell University, Anthony Ingraffia from Cornell University, prominent climate experts testifying that the harm is imminent. And what Dr. Ingraffia testified was that we were facing 10,000 years. 10,000 years, you can't even comprehend it, of irreversible climate change from plants like this. And from this plant specifically, as well as plants like this. And I remind people that this plant is plugging New York City, which is the second largest consumer in the world, to fracked gas dependency for the next 40 years. Total game over for the climate. As far as I'm concerned, this is one of the biggest climate culprits, criminals in the entire country right now. And you know, we know that methane has 100 times the global warming potential of CO2. It's leaking, you know, at unbelievably high rates. Scientists can't even keep up with the data that's coming in. I mean, the harms are accelerating so rapidly. You know, people talk about 12 years. I've heard that 12-year figure invoked by a lot of people like AOC, but you know, that's really misleading. We don't have 12 years. We in our trial, I think Tony testified that we have 6 to 8 years, and that was 3 years ago. And then there was a Nature report out 2 years ago that basically said we have 3 years. And a Harvard scientist just sounded the alarm. James Anderson, I believe is his name. And he said that if we don't engage in an immediate Marshall Plan to turn around our energy use and consumption, within the next 5 years, we're doomed. So, you know, again, you know, when we talk about existential threat, you really have to look at the science to see what's happening. 70% of the permafrost is gone. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. The permafrost is melting 70 years earlier than scientists had expected. Um, and
so when the permafrost melts, that releases methane into the air, and that methane traps more global climate change warming particles than carbon, right?
Right. And other dangerous gases, viruses and microorganisms that we haven't seen for millions of years on this planet. I mean, it's really, really, we're going into very uncharted waters. It's a very dangerous negligence on the part of our elected officials. They're really driving us off a cliff. And that's specifically why I ran for state senate both in 2016 and in 2018, is when I realized that they have deemed entire communities expendable. When I realized that our community of mini-sink didn't matter, but more importantly, life itself didn't matter to all of our elected officials. And I really went to all of our elected officials. Republicans, Democrats, didn't matter to me. When I realized that, then I said, these people are driving us off a cliff, and the only way to stop it is to run myself. So I ran myself in 2016. And at that time, I was up against a 20-year Republican incumbent in a largely conservative district who had never been challenged by the Democratic Party in 20 years. Well, actually, I'm sorry, there were two or three challenges over the course of those 20 years, but, not really meaningful challenges. And I was able to, at that time, the Republican Party tried to knock me off the ballot. They filed a lawsuit to get me off the ballot. The Democrats didn't support me. They actually told me not to fight the lawsuit. They said I won't win, but I did anyway, because the issue, the cause that we were fighting for was so non-negotiable. And I won that lawsuit. And I got about 43% of the vote with almost no money, which, and also,
wow. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah. And also I entered the race really late. I had to enter through a process called opportunity to ballot. So I actually entered as a write-in. So our campaign really didn't even get started until August. And then September, I was hit with a lawsuit. And then that lasted for 6 weeks. And then November was the election. So, we had a really short election cycle, no money, and I was still able to get 43% of the vote. So, 2018 came around and nobody had done anything. The power plant was operating, making people sick. And the power plant, it turns out, was the center of one of New York State's largest corruption scandals that implicated Governor Cuomo's closest aide. He was convicted, found guilty of accepting bribery money from the company, went to jail, and still, despite all that, nobody in the entire state government thought that they should do something about shutting down this plant. And so in 2018, I said, well, I'm going to have to run again. But of course, what I didn't know is the Democratic machinery was preparing for me in 2018, just like 2016, Bernie took them off guard and they weren't expecting it. But 2020, they were prepared, and they had a strategy underway. And so I think, I did encounter, I was running against somebody who claimed to look, be just like me, really, appropriated a lot of my messages, but I was really running against Governor Andrew Cuomo and the Democratic machinery.
And so they didn't want you to win. They wanted a Republican to win.
No, this time around, they knew that they couldn't get away with that. Well, first of all, the Republican that I ran against was implicated in the corruption. So the minute Percoco, the governor's aide, was convicted, he immediately announced his resignation. And, that was the other reason why I ran, was to hold him accountable, because nobody was holding him accountable. And he was very implicated in the corruption. His name was John Bonasek. But he announced his retirement. And so at that point, I think they knew that it was a toss-up, that if a Democrat ran, at that point, a Democrat would win, because the Republican wouldn't have the power of incumbency. And so they, ran a candidate against me who, on the surface looked a lot like me, was a community organizer, environmental activist, the whole deal, but had the entire machinery working for her. And, I mean, I had to deal with a lot of the things that I've seen them use with other progressive candidates like Dennis Kucinich and,
Yeah. So the party machine, the Democratic Party machine, has its strategy to suppress progressives.
yeah,
And the fact that they would rather lose to a Republican than let a progressive win is a fact. It's really hard to deny that at this point. And you're
yeah.
saying that all the stuff, so they were ready for you in 2018. Who won that race?
So the Democrat actually did win that race.
So the Democrat who looked like you on paper, but was really in the pocket of the party.
I think so, because we had the same platform. Actually, her platform was exactly my platform from 2016. And climate change was a big part of my platform. I mean, but the difference is that what I've tried to explain to people is that on the right, you have climate denial and deniers, and on the left, you have climate deceivers, climate deception. And climate truth really is the crack in between the two. So but because I was drafted by circumstance, I've become, pretty knowledgeable about climate policy and energy policy. And so, the state was trying to peddle a climate bill that was just riddled with loopholes. I understood that. I understood that because our community, was a frontline community. And, I think they didn't want somebody who would throw a monkey wrench into all that agenda, which was, make it look like you're passing a climate bill, but give enough loopholes to the industry that they don't have to worry. And that's, sadly what happened. But the one issue that really distinguished me was my determination to have that power plant shut down. And my opponent did pledge, after she won the primary, she did pledge to shut down the power plant. She pledged to sponsor legislation to shut it down, to initiate oversight hearings, but did not fulfill the pledge. Surprise, surprise, did not fulfill that pledge.
So there you go. And so, you see it. So what they have their strategy for Bernie Sanders also. Part of it is having 20 people run.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
so now they can push it to a second ballot, and then the superdelegates choose again. So that's the way they're going to do it. And then they also have Elizabeth Warren running, who is just like your opponent. She has pretty close to the exact same policies as Bernie in a lot of ways, except she's taking corporate money, and she seems to be for those things when it's convenient, and when it's time to fight, she doesn't. So, so that's what we're going to get. We're going to get more of that. Now, you talk about. So we hear the 12-year number, like we only have 12 years to get our act together, 2030, or else what?
I mean, we're talking about ecological.
So, but what happens at that? So when people hear that number, so in 2030, everyone dies, or what starts to, why is that a number? Why is that important?
Well, the point is, I think 12. The IPCC said is 12 years is the point at which, no matter what we do, it becomes irreversible. I think that tipping point is much closer.
Much closer, right?
Yeah, and I speak with scientists on a regular basis, and what I can tell you is they're very conservative about what they tell the public for fear of causing absolute panic. But they themselves are in a state of absolute panic.
Yeah.
And if you understand the science, you would be in a state of absolute panic. And so when people say to me, oh, I like this person and they're progressive, and I like that person and they're progressive, for certain issues, okay, we maybe have time to figure our way through and make mistakes. But on the issue of healthcare and on the issue of climate change, we have no time. We have no room for mistakes. We need to elect principled progressives, which is why I created the group Principled Progressives. I mean, they say that politics is the art of compromise, and that very well may be true, but you cannot compromise on matters of life and death and health and safety. And that's what you see the Democratic Party repeatedly do, because both parties are really captured by the fossil fuel industry, by big money donors. And when you look at my story, you see that more than ever. The company that I was up against, Competitive Power Ventures, the CEO, the executive of that company that bribed Joseph Percoco, the governor's aide, is a guy named Peter Braith Kelly. And he is one of the most powerful Democratic lobbyist in the country. He actually was part of a lobbying firm with Roger Stone and Paul Manafort. I think it was called Black Manafort, Stone, and Kelly. These are really nefarious people that have a very firm grasp on the Democratic Party. So it's no surprise the Democratic Party doesn't want to hold debates on climate change. It's no surprise that you have a lot of the centrist candidates equivocating on climate change. It's very easy for everyone to adhere or to the Green New Deal, because the Green New Deal is so ambiguous and so non-specific that it can mean anything to anyone. But we need concrete action on the issue of climate change now. And the first thing we need to do is shut down all the frack gas power plants. And any candidate that is not taking that position that, yes, I will ban fracking in the United States, has no climate policy, in my opinion, because fracking and methane has such a tremendous climate impact, as well as a public health impact, that it's non-negotiable. You can't negotiate with physics. You can't negotiate with the natural world. You can't negotiate on climate change.
Okay. So what's your opinion of Joe Biden says he's embracing the Green New Deal? What is that? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, he's a derivative of the all of the above energy policy. Obama will go down in history as making a catastrophic mistake, and he will definitely be linked to the climate crisis because of his all of the above energy policy strategy.
Well, his all the above energy strategy led to what? Fracking pipes across this country, right?
It was a frack America energy policy. That's exactly what it was.
And the reason why there's pipes all across the country, fracking, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but before it used to be illegal to export fossil fuels from our country, and Barack Obama repealed that regulation. So a lot of times these fracking pipes aren't to keep frack gas for ourselves, but it's to send it somewhere so they can liquefy it and export it. Is that true?
That's true. And a lot of our elected officials, even some progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, voted for HR 1616, which is a bill that expands fracking infrastructure in Europe and actually funds the development of import facilities in Europe so that they can import America's fracked gas, which, again, is cataclysmic for the climate. I mean, these people are in denial. And as James Anderson, that Harvard scientist, said, how do these people eat dinner with their children at night? How do they go to sleep? Like, scientists aren't sleeping. I'm not sleeping. You can tell I'm not sleeping. Why would
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would say she voted for that bill because?
I don't know. We haven't, I know a lot of people have reached out to her to try to get an answer. And sadly, even Tulsi Gabbard, who, I'm a big supporter of Tulsi Gabbard's. I'm a big supporter of Bernie's. But Tulsi also voted for HR 1616. So we're trying to find out exactly why. Perhaps it was part of a big omnibus bill. I don't know. But again, there's no negotiating when it comes to climate change. And that should have been a deal breaker.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, so what is so New York, the mayor is going to sign off on their own Green New Deal in New York City. Their plan is to get all of their electricity from renewable sources by 2040. Does that make sense?
Are you talking about the state bill that just passed the other day?
Is that the state bill?
It's called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. They keep changing the name. So this bill, up until Monday morning, and it was just voted on Tuesday in the state Senate and I think yesterday in the Assembly. Up until Monday morning, it was essentially nothing but a publicity stunt, riddled with holes. And a group of us were in a panic Monday morning when we saw that bill, because they apparently negotiated it over the weekend without telling anybody what was in it. And when we saw what was in it, we were in a panic. Now, apparently Monday, Tuesday, they tweaked it a little bit and they did make it better. So I would say it's better than a publicity stunt. But it does have 100% carbon-free, all load-serving entities, which are essentially power generation facilities, would be supposed to be carbon free by 2040. But there is no mechanism to get there. They identify two possible sources: 9,000 megawatts of wind power, offshore wind power, and I think about 7,000 megawatts of solar power. But when you multiply the capacity factor of wind, which is 45%, and the capacity factor of solar, which is 15%, it's a tiny fraction of the energy we consume. The other big deception about that climate bill is it's really false advertising, because it tells everybody we're going to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 85% by 2050. Again, way too little, way too late. But
No kidding.
that's not even true. It's not 85% by 2050. They've got, again, a bunch of loopholes. One of them is a 15% carbon offset. So it actually ends up being 70%, which is lower than our current state policy of 80%. So that is what is being described as the boldest climate bill in the country. And I think you probably get a sense of what the problem here is that the brokers of the narrative about climate change are compromised and corrupt. And that's a really big problem.
So when do people get in the street over this?
I don't know. It seems like, Greta Thunberg, I think that's her name. She's pretty good at calling out elected officials. I wish people in this country had a fraction of that courage. We would be so far better off. The other thing I want to just point out with that climate bill is that one thing they're really silent about is that they're claiming they're going to decrease emissions over the next 30 years, 40 years, but the state is actually increasing it by 25% overnight from the power sector with these two power plants, the one I'm fighting and another one in Cricket Valley. So zip silent when they're flipping the switch to 25% overnight and then promising you, way down in the future, we're going to decrease it. Like, the easiest thing would have been for them to just not flip the switch on to these two power plants. Right. And we actually wrote an amendment, a one-line simple amendment, which would have prohibited those two plants. But no elected official was interested, not the progressives that were really peddled by the progressive establishment that works lock in step with the Democratic establishment in New York State, not by the environmental groups. Nobody took on our amendment. Again, legislation is a means of effecting change, but if they're going to block people from getting in that driver's seat, then that's not going to happen either. But you're right. We need massive civil disobedience. We need a massive climate strike. We're going to start seeing extreme weather events very soon. One of the things that Anderson also pointed out, he said, which shocked me actually, he said by 2022, there will be no ice on either pole. And he said that the Earth has not seen conditions like that for 33 million years. 2022, 33 million years. Again, these are all statistics that you can't even wrap your head around. And again, scientists always are very conservative. So I fear that things are actually even much worse than that.
So should I buy a plot of land in Idaho that has water rights? Is that what I should do?
I mean, maybe. I think they said 33 million years ago, there was no difference in temperature between the equator and the poles. So we're probably going to all have the same temperature everywhere. So it doesn't matter where you buy your plot of land, if there is any land that isn't saturated with water, because we're going to have so much more moisture in the air. Again, I have 4 children. That's why I started doing this, when I realized that we were standing on the precipice of not only this massive climate crisis, but this public health crisis that's being enacted on the bodies of my own children. I said, we've got to do something. And unfortunately, the few mechanisms are being taken from us as we speak. So we have a lot of work to do as a constituency, as concerned citizens. We've got to be much smarter in how we fight the system. And
How would it, so obviously it's going to take people in the streets, the kind of in a French style yellow vest movement to get people to get anything to really happen, because it's not going to, because the corporations own the people who write the rules. So that's not going to happen. So do you have any like what would be your plan to get people into the streets to protest this?
I mean, I'm doing what I've always done is sound the alarm as much as possible using alternative media, because our media is so compromised.
Yes.
I mean, when the New York Times puts out a headline like New York State has just, passed the boldest climate bill in the entire world, everybody thinks, okay, we're done. We can go home. Everything's fine now. It really tells everybody to stand down. That was the same mistake the anti-fracking movement made in 2014 when the governor signed that very deceptive ban. Everybody was like, oh, we're a frack-free state. We can go home. But yet pipelines and compressor stations were expanding. Power plants were being permitted through corruption. It's all about corruption. That's why we have a climate crisis, because of corruption. So we have to address the systemic causes of corruption. Citizens United, getting more voter rights, public financing of elections, ranked choice voting. We need to as much as possible to elect people who are actually going to fight for those things.
So are you aware of Tulsi? She has the OFF Act. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. OFF Act. Yes.
OFF Act. So tell me about that.
I would say that it's stronger than the Green New Deal in the sense that it's legislation. It's not a resolution. So it is binding. It's not non-binding. That matters. And I find it bewildering that for all of the talk about Green New Deal, people are not giving her credit for being the sponsor of the OFF Act. I mean, it is a very important initiative. I would like to see a stronger bill. She did say that she would support a ban on fracking nationwide. And as far as I know, as of right now, her and Bernie Sanders are the only two candidates committed to that. And that is critical because, for all people cry about coal and oil and everything else, really, most of our gas today comes from most of our power today comes from fracked gas.
Really?
And that is the elephant in the room. That is what we have to tackle first. It's our first step in fighting climate change. And if anyone is not talking about that first step, they have no true intent to fight climate change.
Well, so where can people go find out more about your work?
So I have a website, Pramila.com, and principledprogressives.org and protectorangecounty.org. I'm on Facebook. You can follow me there, Twitter. I do my best to get the message out. I'm not a politician. I'm just a mom, really concerned about the future of all of our children, the planet, pets, wildlife. I just read that there was a collapse of an entire colony of penguins in the Antarctic. 40,000 penguins died of starvation. Only 2 remained. And this is apparently happening throughout the world. You see bird colonies collapsing in Australia, in Alaska, in the Netherlands, all over the entire world. These are huge red flags. You just have to look. The bat species in the United States has also collapsed. We've lost 95% of our bat population since 2005. So, we're all interconnected. We need these species to survive ourselves. And we need everyone to realize that this is an existential threat. Perhaps it's too abstract. Perhaps it's too large for people to embrace or understand. But I assure you, if you fight to stop your state from building or approving or operating frack gas power plants in the United States of America, because methane emissions emanating from the United States of America have become the biggest producer of methane emissions in the world right now. I assure you that will go a long way towards fighting climate change and giving our children at least a chance. And there's no reason why we can't do it. We can do it tomorrow if we wanted to. We have to start. And we have to start by electing, at least on this issue, candidates that will not compromise. And again, as far as my analysis of the climate policies of all these candidates right now, there are only two that have that level of commitment, Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard.
All right. Pramila Malik, thank you again for being our guest, and thanks for all your work and raising everyone's consciousness about what needs to be done about getting rid of fracking in this country and fighting climate change. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, we just added St. Louis and Honolulu to our live tour schedule. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our live shows. We might be coming to your town. Go check right now at jimmydorecomedy.com. And if you like the show and want to support it, become a premium member. You can become a patron or through PayPal, or go right to jimmydorecomedy.com and become a premium member. That's the best way. We'll see you at a live show.